Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome to Africa. Isn't it neat to be here? Yeah, so as many of you know, I'm Craig Rodger from New Zealand, and I have been asked to give some opening description of what VERSIM is and how it came about, a VERSIM history. Now, I feel slightly weird doing this because I'm a former head of VERSIM, but I was only head for 10 years. And sitting at the back of the room is Andy Smith, who was previously head of the VERSIM community for more than 20 years. So in fact, I have to tell you all that some of the text that I'm going to be showing you was stolen from a website that I inherited off Andy, which has now been inherited on to Jacob and Claudia and Mark. So anyway, if you really want to know some of the older history, you probably want to be talking to Andy. So, for those of you who have come to VERSIM wondering, what's this VERSIM thing? Okay, VERSIM stands for VLF, ELF, remote sensing of ionospheres and magnetospheres. And there's sort of two ways of looking at the VERSIM community. First of all, you can do it in a very administrative way, the way our parent bodies would think of us. So, we have two parent bodies. VERSIM is formally a scientific working group under the umbrella organizations of IAGA, the International Association of Geomagnetism and Aeronomy, which itself is under IUGG, and we are also under the International Union of Radioscience. So if you're the sort of person who likes to know all the finer details, in IAGA we are linked to both divisions 2 and 3, and in VERSI we are linked, very strongly linked to commissions G and H, and then at the last VERSI meeting, Commission E said, why aren't we part of VERSIM? We want to be part of VERSIM. And so we seem now to have 3 commissions linked to us. In practice, this doesn't mean very much, okay? But you have to live inside an administrative structure, right? And so this is where we live inside the administrative structure. As far as IAGA and VERSI are concerned, our organization exists to provide feedback for them when scientific issues come up, and also for the organization of scientific sessions at these large international meetings. So I would encourage you to come to the business meetings at IAGA and VERSI so that we can put forward sessions at the future conferences that are interesting to us rather than other people, okay? And this has worked very well for us because we end up putting forward sessions, putting forward conveners, writing the necessary material such that 2 or 4 years later, when we get together at these international meetings, there are sessions that are interesting to us. And then all we have to do is submit our talks and show up. Okay, so that's worked quite well for us. However, of course, that's quite a small thing. The business meetings, an hour, well, I think I was running them in more like 20 minutes, to 2 hours at international business meetings. But for more than 10 years now, VERSIM has also held its own dedicated workshops. And I'll be talking about a bit more about that in some later slides. The other way of looking at VERSIM is from a more scientific point of view. What are we doing? What do we tell our parent bodies that we're doing? So what we tell our parent body is that we're an international group of scientists interested in the ELF and the VLF radio spectra. And if you go back in history, VERSIM sprung out of the goal of studying the plasmasphere and looking at how whistlers are propagating through the plasmasphere and what that can tell us about the space out there and also about the propagation of radio waves, which is why it was interesting to IAGA and why it was interesting to VERSI. Now, of course, over time, our interests have morphed and widened and expanded. And we've tried to provide a body such that active researchers from many countries and many backgrounds can get together and share information, share scientific knowledge, and build new scientific collaborations. Formally, we have to provide a list of the science topics that we're interested in to VERSI and IAGA, and I have written that list down here. What I have to confess to you is that this list has not changed for approximately 15 years. The reason for that is not that our interests are unchanged. Of course, our interests morph and change constantly. But the issue is when you have two parent bodies and you have to go to both parent bodies and get them to agree on any formal change to your description, it is administratively painful. And so in the period where I was leader of the organization, I said, that list is fine. Let's just leave it that way. And when people came to me and said, oh, but I'm not on that list, it's like, that's okay. Don't feel left out. Come to VERSIM. Talk to us. You're not even in our frequency range. We don't care. Come along. Let's talk about the science. But I don't really want to go through the process of administratively changing everything just so we can be flexible. So if you feel left out from that, I'm sorry. This is entirely my fault. For about the last 15 years, we sort of look like our description has not changed in any way, shape, or form because I haven't changed it. And yet, all sorts of things have been happening. Okay, so plasma structures and boundaries, wave-particle and wave-wave interactions, wave-induced particle precipitation, wave propagation, sprites and lightning and stuff. That's actually quite a lot of broad areas, and yet it doesn't encapsulate all the things we do. We do more than this, oddly. Okay, so that's all cool. So that's the sort of science description of what we do. Hopefully, most of you know who the current co-chairs are, and that's Jacob Bortnick, sitting here in the front, and Mark Clilford, hiding relatively near to the back. Jacob? Mark. And this, by the way, is Halley 6, which looks a little bit like Sanai 4, but is not the same. It's the British Antarctic base down in Antarctica, obviously. Okay, so, and formally, Jacob is the co-chair representing IAGA, one of our parent bodies, and Mark is the co-chair representing VERSI, the other parent body. So each one of our parent bodies gets one co-chair, and they are equally weighted. So, how did this come about? According to Andy's text, the group dates back to the 1950s when VERSI had a completely different structure. But it was formally established as a joint committee of two different parts of VERSI in 1969. And at that stage, we were called Whistlers in the Magnetosphere, and we were chaired by Don Carpenter for Stanford University. And many, many people here will know Don by reputation, by scientific work, or as the great person that he is. And he's sort of the father of the organization. In 1975, that's when the organization starts having two parent bodies with both VERSI and IAGA. And at that point, VERSIM was known as the Working Group on Passive Electromagnetic Probing of the Magnetosphere. And it turns out that's when VERSI completely reorganized itself to call its commissions A, B, C, D, etc., etc., etc. Interestingly, if you try and go on the web and find out what Commission 3 and Commission 4 means in the old VERSI, you can't find it. Maybe there's a book somewhere on the history of VERSI, but it hasn't been loaded into Google Books, and because nobody thought to write it down in the internet, I now can't find it using Google, and so it's sort of lost knowledge as far as I'm concerned. I can find documents that have been scanned in from 1975 describing how they want to change the commissions from what they were to what they are now, but they spend all their time talking about what the new structure should be and just assume that you know the old structure. And I just find that slightly interesting from a history point of view, the assumptions that people make in terms of what we already know. And if you're writing a scientific paper, this is probably quite a relevant point. You know, when you're writing down what do we know now, we should actually be describing some of what we know now and are building on it. Not so much because we're going to lose that information, but people like students don't know what we know now. They need to learn these things. And so in the introduction of the paper, a little bit of background as to what we know now and what this paper is then adding to, I think is a really good thing. You can criticize me for not doing it too, of course, if you look at my papers, but that just occurred to me. Okay, and it was in 1975 that we ended up in the structure with the two co-chairs. In 1989, the name changed to VERSIM, VLF, ELF, remote sensing of the ionosphere and magnetosphere, and in 1996 the name was slightly tweaked, but the acronym unchanged to VLF, ELF, remote sensing of ionospheres and magnetospheres. Here's Andy. Thank you, Andy, for that detail. Okay, so, so this means that VERSIM is, as a joint ERSI-IAGA working group, is actually 41 years old. And we've been called VERSIM for 27 years. And yet here we are meeting together in South Africa, 41 years after this organization was created, with a large number of countries present. So the organization, the structure may be old, but I'd like to say that it's not jaded or faded. So if you want to, if we just look at who has served as co-chairs over the years, Don Carpenter was the first co-chair from ERSI, and Michael Rycroft was the first IAGA co-chair. I then want to point out that in 1981, Andy Smith took over from Michael Rycroft, and he served as the IAGA co-chair of VERSIM for 22 years. Okay? Now, one of the things is, IAGA meets every 2 years, ERSI meets every 3 years. So you'll find all these numbers have to be divisible by 3, and all these numbers have to be divisible by 2. It's just the way the structure works. That's where we do the changes. So then we have, on the ERSI side, Tsuruda, and then Umran Eden, who served as the co-chair for 12 years. When Andy stepped down, he passed it on to me, but of course, because he'd done it for 22 years, we still had to have more change on the ERSI side, and then it was Michel Perot. And so Michel served for 9 years, and I crossed over with Michel briefly, and then he stepped down, and Janos Lichtenberger became the ERSI co-chair, until at which point I decided that I'd done this for 10 years, and it seemed like a good idea for me to pass it on to somebody else. And Jacob Bortnick was kind enough to take up the role, and then Janos stepped down after 9 years, and Mark Kluivert took up the role. So looking at this, Jacob, you can see the sort of time period that you need to look at these averages. Okay? Look at these averages. I know it's gone 22 years, 10 years. We don't want a decreasing series here. So you've got the big hat for ages, mate. Yeah. Now, having said that, I've really got to admit that being, basically, when I was asked to take on this role as the co-chair by Andy Smith, I was a new faculty position. I had just relatively recently been given a job that probably meant that I had a job in the next year. I just moved off 1-year contracts to a 1-year contract to a 1-year contract, and I suddenly had a permanent contract. And coming from a small country far away, suddenly I was in a position to interact with people and meet people and then exchange emails with them, and it was really good for me, actually. And I know now a bunch of you know me, and I know a bunch of you, and so we can get together in different parts of the world and do science together and have fun together as well. And it's one of the great things about being an international scientist is that you have friends from all over the world. And I need to point out that a large number of the people who are listed here as ERSI co-chairs are still very active in VERSIM science. Workshops. Since 2004, the VERSIM working group has been organising workshops. And they've been timed to not be in the years, generally, that we're having an IAGA meeting or an ERSI meeting. So when our parent bodies are getting together, we're trying to avoid them. But of course, there's a 2-year cycle and a 3-year cycle, so there are empty years. And we are basically every 2 years we've been meeting. And so the series started in 2004 in Sodankula, and I'll talk about each meeting very briefly in a moment. And then we met in Finland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, so that was our European series. And then in 2012, VERSIM broke out of Europe and went to Brazil, and then to New Zealand, and now to South Africa. So currently we're ticking off continent-wide areas as we sweep around the world. Now, from my perspective, the VERSIM workshops have been remarkable, because what used to happen is that the community got together for business meetings at IAGA or ERSI. We might get together for a time as short as half an hour. We might get together for a time as long as 2 hours. And people would come up, and there'd be a 5 or 10 minute discussion on what science was occurring, what VERSIM science was occurring in your country in the last couple of years at the business meeting. And then people would go their separate and subsequent ways. Now we're meeting for 4 or 5 days every 2 years. There's a lot more scientific collaboration occurring. We actually know what each other is doing much better because we're hanging out with each other on a regular basis. And the series of VERSIM workshops has massively improved the community's interaction. But I also think that it's been a really good opportunity for some people from small nations who are working in a certain area. They've ended up collaborating with other groups, and it's stimulated a lot of extra activity. There's been a lot of data exchanged, expertise exchanged, just ideas. And it's been much more fruitful for us. So looking at the meetings, as I said, we met in 2004 in Sadankala. This actually wasn't the first VERSIM workshop, except it is now. We have rewritten history. Okay, when this meeting occurred, it was called the VLF Workshop 2004 because, well, we hadn't agreed as a community to have a series of VERSIM workshops. So Jyrki went away and did it, and we went, oh, that was good, let's do it again. And so it's been retrospectively numbered the first VERSIM workshop held at the Sadankala Geophysical Observatory. And because it was a success and people were happy, Jyrki agreed to run it again, which is the 2006 workshop. Group photo here at a reindeer farm, which was where the conference dinner was. Reindeer's nice and pretty. Well, in its pre-food state. Okay, so that was good fun. Then in 2008, we moved to Tihan in Hungary. And one of my very strong memories of this meeting, here's Daniel Hamar, the VERSIM space scientist and internationally recognized Hungarian folk musician. He's played in the Albert Hall, he's played in Carnegie Hall. His band performed for us as part of the concert, part of the workshop. So that was really special. And that was a bit of a warm-up for them before they ended up also giving a performance at the IAGA conference in Sopron a few years later on. Okay, so VERSIM 2008. VERSIM 2010, we went to Prague, and that was at the Globus Hotel. I need to emphasize that because that's going to come up just a little bit later in our story. And on the outskirts of Prague. And then VERSIM 2012 in Sao Paulo. I can't find a conference picture for the Brazil meeting. I don't think one occurred. I have no memory of one occurring. However, my memory of events is not the sharpest. I have written to the organizers of that meeting, and they haven't really got back to me. It was a few weeks ago. But I don't think there was a conference picture. But if anyone can find a conference picture, just because I'm trying to put together the history of the organization and things get lost otherwise, it would be great to have. And then in 2014, people came and visited me in Dunedin, New Zealand. And we had the 6th workshop. And of course, we're now here at the 7th. Now, how did the workshop series happen? Because these things don't just appear out of nowhere. The workshop series occurred because there was, in January 2000, there was a meeting at the Globus Hotel in Prague. And Jyrki Manninen arrived in Prague a little bit early, and he was sitting in the bar behind the Globus Hotel, and he was having a drink. And while he was sitting there by himself having a drink, he thought, the community of VLF researchers gets together sporadically at large international conferences. And we don't get together at the same place. A few people are going to this meeting, a few people are going to this meeting. And you see the occasional talk that's relevant for us here, and here, and here, and here. Wouldn't it be nice if we got together and created a workshop series? And then the next day, some more people arrived, and he had dinner in the same pub with Michael Rycroft and David Nunn, and Jyrki suggested this idea, and they went, that sounds like a good thought. And so by 2004, we had the first VERSIM workshop, which was successful enough that we had the second, which was successful enough that here we are for the 2016 event. As I said, the 2016 event. So now we're gathering for the 7th VERSIM workshop. And for a number of you, you may be thinking, well, I'm not really here for VERSIM. I'm here for the Radiation Belt Symposium. That's fine. You're welcome. You're welcome to join us, and hopefully you'll enjoy yourself and learn some things and remain part of our community, because actually the crossovers between a lot of radiation belt science and a lot of what VERSIM does is very, very strong. It may not be written in the main list of goals of the VERSIM science topics. We don't have radiation belt physics there. That's entirely my laziness. I'm sorry, Jacob, if you would like to correct that, you can, though it's an administrative pain. So, on the basis of the history of past workshops, us getting together provides an excellent chance for the community to facilitate the exchange of ideas, information and experience, build new collaborations, and possibly have valuable conversation in bars. Because it's very clear on the basis of Jyrki's original great idea that having discussions in bars has scientific value. And so I cannot suggest to you that you shouldn't be doing that while you are here in Hermanus. And I can say that when I have been here in Hermanus, I've had some good discussion in bars, or in South Africa in general, enjoying some of the fine wines that are produced in this country. And I come from a wine-producing country, right? So we're sort of in competition, but it's okay. We both make nice wine, and that's the most important thing. Okay, so that is my presentation on VERSIM history, and we probably need to move on to some more science.